Welcome back to the British Food History Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Neil Buttery, food historian and chef. On the podcast today is returning guest Mark Dawson, a food historian specialising in the food and social history of the early modern period, but also specialising in the regional food of the Midlands. Today we're talking about the traditional food and drink of his home county of Derbyshire. As usual, I shall save most of my news for the end except for this one headline. I am going to be hosting the first day of the upcoming 2-day Fermenters Guild Symposium at Omford Gardens in London on the evening of 11th May from 6 p.m. On this first day, Sandor Katz is coming along to talk and do a demo, and there's a panel with Dr. Johnny Drain, Olia Hercules, Chef Sam Black, and also Sandor Katz. Big hitters in the fermentation world. It's very exciting. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I hope you can make it. As regular listeners will know, domestic fermentation is a big area of interest for me, so I'm very excited. And I'm very glad that the Fermenters Guild contacted me to be the host of this first day. On the 11th of May, of course there's a second day on the 12th of May. The link to the Fermenters Guild website with more information, including how to get hold of tickets, is in the show notes. Season 10 of the podcast is sponsored by Netherton Foundry. Netherton Foundry are producers of top-quality British-made cookery equipment. Nestled in rural South Shropshire, Netherton Foundry, headed by Neil and Sue Curry, take inspiration from the local ironmasters of the 18th and 19th centuries to craft traditional cookware from iron, oak and copper using non-toxic materials. Their cookware is built to last, whether it be their famous prospector pans, of which I am a proud owner, crumpet rings, or their impressive range of outdoor cookware. Netherton Foundry ships to several countries outside of the UK, including the USA. So visit netherton-foundry.co.uk to find out more about their wonderful products, approved not just by me, but by folks such as Tom Parker Bowles, Diana Henry and Nigella Lawson. And we will be hearing from Sue and Neil and the Netherton Foundry team in next week's episode. Alright, let's get cracking. Yes, I am talking with Mark Dawson about the traditional food of Derbyshire. You may remember he was on the podcast last season talking about Derbyshire Oatcakes. Well, since then he has written a fantastic book called Lumpy Tums, Derbyshire's Food and Drink, published by Amberley and out in the wild from the 15th of April 2026. We talk about oat-based foods such as thar cakes, which were traditionally eaten on All Souls' Day, thin pudding and savoury pudding, plus the origins of the Bakewell pudding and Derbyshire's very high proportion of drinking establishments per head, amongst many other things. Those listening to the Secret Podcast get more than a quarter of an hour of bonus material, where we talk about Derbyshire cheeses, the return of small-scale breweries to the county, Wakes cakes, and Ashbourne gingerbread. I'll be back at the end, of course, but now please enjoy the traditional food and drink of Derbyshire with Mark Dawson. Welcome back to the podcast, Mark. Congratulations on the publication of your new book.
Thank you.
Very exciting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it coming out in April. Yeah.
Yes, it should be out
April 15th.
As we're speaking in the future. Now, we spoke about your research into Derbyshire Oatcakes.
Yes.
Last year.
Yeah.
But now you've got a whole book on Derbyshire food.
Yes.
How did you wrangle that one? How did it come about?
Amberley actually got in touch with me, the publisher, and they've got a series of books about traditional food of certain county, and they asked me if I would like to do one on Derbyshire. I did actually try and pitch Derbyshire Oatcakes as a book at the time, but I think they felt that was a little bit too niche. So I said, yeah, I can do a book on Derbyshire, food and drink in Derbyshire. I've done the research on oatcakes, done some research on Derbyshire puddings, and so it all sort of came together, and I spent, I think it was probably about 18 months, 2 years putting it together.
Because of course the Derbyshire Oatcake stuff is so well researched, so you just thought, well, I'm just going to apply that method to the other.
Yes, so there's so bring that in and bring in all a lot of the stuff I'd done already, but also then extending it out to do other foods as well.
Yeah. How did you find out? I mean, it's amazing the stuff that you found out there. How did you go about doing it? What were your main resources? Were you just looking at microfilms a lot, or what?
Like James Bond.
Like James Bond.
No, there's some of the resources that have been really useful. Actually, the British Newspaper Archive online, that is tremendously useful. And there are often things written in local papers about different foods, about competitions of various foods, and just sometimes little notes about the origins of some food. So, for example, we're going to talk about Bakewell pudding, but the chap who was the son of the woman who invented it, he was talking about his mum inventing Bakewell pudding. He was interviewed in the 1880s, and that was something in the Derbyshire Times. So there's all sorts of odd little sort of things you find in the newspapers. But a lot of the research has been local studies libraries, the one here in Chesterfield, Matlock, Derby, Derbyshire Archives, which is in Matlock as well. A lot of stuff in there. There's manuscript cookbooks in Derbyshire Archives going back to the 17th century, which are useful to look through. A lot of the recipes are just national recipes that people have recorded, but there are also little local ones as well.
That's nice, because often, they're the really useful ones, because you can't trust a cookbook to really show you what people are actually eating because they're so aspirational.
Yeah.
So the handwritten manuscripts, at least they intended to make it, even if they didn't make it.
Yes, and quite often there's little notes in there as well. And then you've got account books as well, which survive. So they're often, again, they're sometimes a bit of a remove in terms of what people may have been eating, but there are sometimes good details in there. So one detail in there there's one particular account book of a chap from the early 18th century who references Ashbourne gingerbread, which was quite neat, because up until then, I think most people have thought was Ashbourne gingerbread had somehow been created by some kind of French Napoleonic officer who'd been a prisoner of war in Ashbourne. That was a kind of popular story. But it seems that the Ashbourne gingerbread was certainly around earlier than that in the 18th century. This guy wanted to buy some. So, but also I've found that when I'm going out doing talks and just visiting places that sell foods now, markets, farmers markets, shops, you get a lot of information from the people who are selling food now, some of which is traditional, like the oatcakes, like Bakewell puddings, thar cakes, cheeses, all sorts of things that we're probably going to talk about. Breweries, I've been to some of the local breweries.
Yes, it is very encouraging, the number of people still making these traditional foods. And it's nice, they've kind of let you in, you're taking some photographs of the products, or sometimes their establishments.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see that maybe it's not quite at the forefront, of local cuisine as it maybe was 150, 200 years ago, these things. It's nice to see that still have a part. Yes.
And I think they're and they're obviously conscious of their history as well, so it kind of works both ways. They're interested in what I'm going to sort of put together, and likewise, I'm interested in what they've got to say too. So it's been very nice. It's been a good experience over the last couple of years putting this together.
Oh, good. People can't always say that about writing a book. Right, let's start with some basics, just in case there's lots of people from outside of the UK listening. Actually, there's probably quite a few people from the UK who are thinking, not quite actually sure where Derbyshire is. So let's do a primer.
Okay, right. Well, it's bang in the centre of England, just about geographically. I think it is just about in the centre of England. We've got Nottinghamshire on the east, Cheshire and Staffordshire on the west, Leicestershire, Warwickshire down the south, and Yorkshire to the north. It's the bottom end of the Pennine chain, so they've got the Peak District covering sort of a large part of the county, and that is I think it's the most popular national park, the most visited national park. So a lot of people come into Derbyshire to visit the Peak District, and have been doing so for a very long time. People have been coming as tourists to Derbyshire to look at the scenery from the 1600s. So it's got a long history of tourism. So yeah, that's the county. It's also it's been an area that's had a lot of industry develop as well. From the lead industry, which can go trace far back to the Romans, lead mining that ended a few hundred years ago. But there's also been coal mining and textile industries as well. So again, that's brought trade with other parts of the country.
Lots of mouths to feed as well. What foods then generally are associated with Derbyshire? Because I think people, if you said maybe Yorkshire or Cornwall, some things would immediately come to mind.
Yes.
Whether it's produce or whether it's made dishes or drinks.
Yeah.
What do you reckon's popping into most people's minds?
Well, I don't know what's popping into most people's minds. It's difficult to say really what pops into most people's minds, but I would say the main things that I would associate with the county, and I think it's reasonable to say people in the past associated with the county, one of the things that visitors saw when they came was the fact that a lot of the main grain that was grown was oats. Yeah. And that certainly affected the diet through large parts of the county. I mean, the parts of the county in the south where the land was better and they grew more wheat and barley. But throughout a lot of the county, they could grow nothing else but oats. And so that did reflect a lot in the diet. So oatcakes, as we talked about before.
Yes.
But also other things that they made with oats. So thar cakes, which were a kind of biscuit that was, it was a kind of a solid sort of cake come biscuit. But that was one thing that evolved into a sort of a sweet thing in the 18th century. Lumpy Tums, which is the name of the book, which was a kind of...
yes, we briefly mentioned those last time.
Yeah. I mean, some of these things are known elsewhere. So Lumpy Tums, thar cakes were actually known elsewhere in sort of Yorkshire as well.
Well, that's one of the things I actually thought was quite interesting in the book when I was reading it, that you really highlighted, because people love to have these chalk lines for these regional foods, but regional foods don't really respect border lines, county lines, or even country lines sometimes.
No, I mean, you can't, because I think that there are areas of Derbyshire that fall into, like I said, a large part of north and western Derbyshire falls into that sort of area where oats was the main grain, but that's the same in Lancashire, that's the same in Yorkshire as well. And a lot of the foods are similar. Oatcakes, there were different forms of oatcakes in Yorkshire, but there was similar oatcakes in Staffordshire to ones made in Derbyshire and South Yorkshire. So yeah, there are no sort of hard and fast borders with some of these things.
We won't talk about oatcakes again. People can go back and listen to that episode. There was a nice big variety of other oat-based things. A few jumped out to me. One, because the name sounds awful, but the description actually sounds quite nice, and that's thin pudding.
Right. Yeah, I mean... Thin pudding, I think actually the description thin pudding is thin as in poor rather than as in the consistency of it, because essentially it's just oats and milk or even just water boiled together until it's stodgy and thick, and then you can slice it and put butter on it, and that's it, really. That's something described by William Ellis in 1750. He was a Hertfordshire farmer and journalist. So he was describing all sorts of things he'd heard of from around the country, things people did with different grains. And it was an example to him of, if you've not got much money and you've not got much in the way of food, this is something they do in Derbyshire. Apparently, they just boil oats and water together and eat that.
Hey, I mean,
so if you think you're badly off, just think of the folk in Derbyshire, what they have to put up with.
But people do it with polenta. Polenta chips. Yeah. You boil your polenta with some salt, let it cool down, cut it into little oblongs, and then shallow fry it, and that's trendy.
Yeah, well,
it's absolutely no different.
I'm waiting then for somebody to shallow frying sort of oat chips. Then
maybe we're the ones that need to do it. Going on from that though, savoury pudding.
Yep.
Which I guess is maybe a more complex version of that, I suppose.
Yeah, and this is one of those where again there's recipes that describe it as a Derbyshire thing. There are also Florence White, Good Things in England, which was 1930s.
Excellent book.
Yep.
Excellent book.
She has savoury pudding as a Yorkshire thing. So
well, it did sound like a dock pudding when I was reading it.
So it's kind of across the two counties really. Again, it's oat-based. It's oats sort of cooked this time with onions and herbs, so it kind of more of a savoury thing, hence the name, as opposed to a sweeter pudding. And they often the recipes will add eggs or stale bread to it, and you have that with your meat to soak up the gravy, and probably to make the meat go further. A bit like Yorkshire pudding, so that you don't need to have as much meat, to be honest. So
no, it sounds good. I guess there's equivalent in Wales with the lava bread cakes mixed with oatmeal and fried and bacon. Oh, I really like all those sorts of things. They're due a comeback.
Yes, I mean, and
they should be.
And savoury pudding is one that's, I don't think is particularly well known. And like I say, I think it is. It's one of those. It's more regional than specifically a Derbyshire thing. But it was in the 1920s. There was a book about county foods, and it was one of the 4 that were chosen for Derbyshire by the lady who wrote that book, Helen Eden.
The other thing that leapt out to me, because of the story associated with them, or rather the story that you told of the importance in the community, was the thar or the thar cakes.
Yeah, which are another one that's mainly regional rather than specifically Derbyshire. They're known. The name thar comes from tharf, and tharf cakes were known in the medieval period, and they weren't a specifically regional thing at all. It was a generic term for unleavened bread. But that term tharf cake, by the 17th century, it's described then by Ray as being a specifically northern dialect term for an unleavened oat cake. So basically, you're just getting your oats and some water together, patting it into a kind of a modge, and then cooking it on a bake stone. So it's a sort of not a particularly attractive thing by the sounds of it, but I think it's possibly just something that you might just put together as a quick thing to eat.
I had a go at making them once on a bake stone, which is quite tricky. I put a little bit of treacle in, there's a bit of lard in there. Am I getting this right? Is this what you would agree with?
So by the 18th century, the first description, there's a description in the 18th century by a guy called Samuel Pegg, who was a clergyman, came from Whittington, went to be a clergyman down in Kent, but came back up this way, Whittington, just outside Chesterfield, in Derbyshire. And he, in his later life, he was an antiquarian, very interested in. I think he did also. He did an edition of the Form of Curie.
Oh, okay.
So in the late 18th century. So as I say, he was very interested in aspects of history that perhaps other people weren't interested in. He was interested in food history. He wrote a book called Derbycisms, which were about local dialect terms, and in there he describes thar cake. And he also describes all sorts of other things to do, like doshans, to do with making oatcakes.
Yes.
Wonderful local words. And he describes thar cakes. By then, he says it's a specifically Derbyshire term, which wasn't actually true. But he says in Derbyshire, we talk about these things. He said they are made with oatmeal, water, treacle, as you say, and they're made with the first oatmeal. Specifically, it says the first oatmeal. So they've now become something that's got this sweetened element to it.
Yeah.
And as you say, they often add recipes that you find, certainly from the 19th century onwards, have got some sort of fat included as well, generally lard, because they are a cheap thing.
Yeah.
But that first oatmeal, again, suggests some kind of, I hesitate to say, ritual thing.
Like lammas bread and things like that. So the first cereals of the harvest being particularly beloved and important to the community.
Yes. Yeah. So, but they seem to have become that in the 18th century. This isn't some ancient Iron Age thing.
Yes, it's not Anglo-Saxon or something.
Yeah, it does seem to have been something that, that appears in with, I guess, the fact that a lot of sugar coming into the country by the later 17th century, a lot cheaper. But particularly treacle is something that everybody can afford. By the 18th century, and so it finds its way into what would have been a kind of a rather unattractive thing of just oatmeal and water. Now it's a bit of treacle in there, and it's now all of a sudden slightly more attractive. Yeah. And it becomes this kind of celebratory food in a way that's eaten around about the time of the harvest. The harvest of oats, they'd be harvesting that quite late in the year, so October. Okay. So it's not like the sort of harvest that we have, you might imagine happening in August. When they're harvesting oats in Derbyshire, Lancashire, Yorkshire as well, they often be harvesting quite late in the year, and it does seem that it is associated with that period, and that these things are consumed around about All Souls Day. In Lancashire, as I say, this is known in Lancashire and Yorkshire as well. They have a thing called Thar Cake Monday, which is the first Monday after Halloween.
I've not heard of that.
In Bradfield, which is just near Sheffield, in Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, just near the Yorkshire-Derbyshire border, they had Caking Day. These things recorded in the 19th century. In Derbyshire, they had thar cake joinings, which were kind of a community thing where people would get together to purchase the ingredients, to buy or to make thar cakes, and they would sort of share them out. It was like a sort of communal thing that happened that's recorded in the 19th century. And they continue into the 20th century. In Yorkshire, the name thar cake disappears and it gets called parkin instead.
I was going to say, they evolve, don't they?
So it evolves and that gets lighter. It gets wheat flour added to it and baking soda, and so they become lighter. And that's, it's basically what he's now parking.
Yes.
In Lancashire, the name thar cake's still known into the 20th century, but does seem to die out there too. But in Derbyshire, the name thar cake carries on through the 20th century. And there are two different forms. There's a kind of slab thar cake, which is like a sort of parking kind of thing,
but
only made with oatmeal, so not kind of softish, a bit tough.
Right.
You can see why it evolved and had wheat flour and baking soda added to it when they were available.
Yeah.
But the Derbyshire one stays traditionally as made with oatmeal only, so a bit of a thick slab. And the other way of making it was to roll the mixture out a bit thinner and turn it into a kind of a biscuit. And cut it into rounds, and that has a lot. That form of it survives into the 21st century. In that form, they were being made and sold around Wirksworth, which is in central Derbyshire, which was the lead mining capital of the lead field. They were being sold there. A couple of places were selling them. There was a cafe that was selling them. May's Tea Room was selling them up until 2023. And there was a bakery called Pepper's Cottage Bakery that was selling them on Wirksworth Farmers Market right up until last year. And sadly, they stopped selling them then as the head baker retired.
That's it. It's getting people to carry it on, isn't it?
That's it. So there are a few things that they made. I mean, this guy Steve made his own oatcakes, made thar cakes, made wakes cakes, and all sorts of traditional sort of Derbyshire things he made. And I believe that he's also carried the business on, but they don't necessarily do all the things that they used to make. They are still making them though in Tideswell.
Oh, good. Okay,
there's a place called Tyndall's that sells thar cakes.
That's the place to go.
That's the place to go. And they sell them obviously year round, but they did used to be associated with a specific time of year. They came, like Parkin's associated with bonfire night. Bonfire night came to be the thing that they were sort of eating around.
Yes, as things became more secular,
people
weren't really recognising
All Souls
I think,
Day anymore. Around All Souls, it became sort of, the celebration was around bonfire night. And indeed, newspapers local newspapers in the 1950s in Derbyshire would sort of print little things like, mothers ought to make these for their kids on bonfire night, and then they substitute golden syrup for the treacle. But this headline, thar cakes, traditional Derbyshire thar cakes, make these for your kids on bonfire night. They've got a long history.
Yeah, they're good. I enjoy them. Ale and cakes. They're often combined.
Yes.
I think it's fair to say, after reading your book, that the people of Derbyshire like a drink.
Indeed.
Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say, yeah, I think that.
The number of drinking establishments per head is astounding.
Yeah, well, yeah, and this comes from 1577. There was a register of ale houses. People had to become licensed to sell ale, sell beer, and to have their house classified as an ale house. And yes, there are some remarkable statistics for the number of people who register for these licenses, an indication of them. Yeah. But so, for example, in Chesterfield, there were something like 1 in every 4 households registers as an ale house, which is impressive.
That is impressive.
Yeah. So I mean, it does become.
Is that because people are maybe making the ale at home domestically, and you have to have some kind of license for people to come round and buy it from you? So it's basically, next door neighbours come round to mine, but they have to register.
Yes,
that becomes a transactional thing.
Yeah, so you're officially registered. And Chesterfield's a market town. It's a market town with sort of like quite a big hinterland. People coming sort of from the west, from the Peak District, from the east, from areas where they did grow more grain. So coming into the market, bringing various goods in, the lead industry, tanning, which was sort of a specialism of the town in the Tudor period and later as well. So there's a lot of people coming into a market town So you'd expect to have sort of large numbers of people who might want to occasionally have their house as an ale house and might want to have the ability to do it, not necessarily do it all the time.
And it's not like each one of those is a tavern.
Yeah, exactly. So they're not open all the time. But there are quite remarkable statistics. Sort of, I mean, specifically for Chesterfield's quite. But also, but in the middle. But so Derbyshire as a whole, I think it's about 1 in 50. So that's across the county. Pretty high. And that was still quite high. And that's quite high. There's a chap called Peter Clarke who wrote about about ale houses from the late medieval period right through to the 1800s, and he sort of analysed these statistics and the Midland counties, specifically Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, and Leicestershire, had the highest concentration.
So Nottinghamshire, oatcakes.
But Nottinghamshire even higher. I mean, this is the thing, neighbouring Nottinghamshire was even higher than Derbyshire. So, well, yeah, the highest concentration seems to be around there. And he didn't really have an answer. He posited it might be to do with sort of looser manorial control and areas that have got nascent rural industry, which certainly would apply to Derbyshire. And that might be why there are more people sort of casually saying, oh, yeah, I'll have a licence. So maybe there's a sort of a wider spread of brewing rather than it being concentrated in a smaller number of people. So I don't know that there's necessarily more beer or ale being drunk in Derbyshire. There's just probably more people potentially brewing it. A wider range of people with brewing skills. And I think that then is maybe important because later on in the 16th century into the 17th century, there are various people who say, William Camden, for example, described Derbyshire ale as being very good. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's because there's more people making it. The skills have got out. There's perhaps, a wider range of people around making it. And Celia Fiennes, who does travels all over the country in the late 17th century, she comes to Chesterfield and she says it's got the best ale in the kingdom. So, she's been everywhere, so she'd know,
Okay, big guns time. Bakewell pudding.
Yes.
Which, well, we should point out, not the same as a Bakewell tart, because people might be thinking of a Bakewell tart, right?
They might be, yeah.
We better explain what a Bakewell pudding is for those uninitiated.
A Bakewell pudding, right. So it's a puff pastry case that's got a layer of jam on the bottom.
Yes.
And then a custard over the top.
Very sweet. Very sweet custard.
Very sweet, and it's in the contents of the custard that I think we have the that's allegedly where the secret lies. And the differences are there are sometimes different interpretations of what that custard was made of, and historically there were as well.
Well, we might get onto that because there was some jaw-dropping for me anyway.
Absolutely,
things in your section on there. Absolutely revelation. It's a complex story, the Bakewell pudding, isn't it?
It is, and it's part of the tourist industry, basically, of Derbyshire, going right back to the early 1800s when the Duke of Rutland, another aristocrat with lots of land in around Derbyshire, he wanted to turn Bakewell into a spa town like Buxton. And there is indeed a sort of local waters. There's a bath house. But, that effort didn't come to fruition. Right. Bakewell's a lovely town. It's the centre of the Peak District. The spa sort of aspect didn't really take off. But he built a new big hotel, the Rutland Arms, in 1804, and installed in it a couple to run it, the Hudsons. The chap died unfortunately very soon afterwards. The lady, Anne Hudson, she married a guy called Mr. Greaves, William Greaves, who was a friend of her husband's. And together they ran it. And sometime around this time, she got a young family by her first husband, then she also had kids by her second husband. They need to make ends meet. And at some point in the early 1800s, she comes up with this recipe for Bakewell pudding.
Right.
And sells it at the Rutland Arms Hotel.
Well, when I was researching my book, Need to Know, folks, still available, I only had about 800 words to do the history of Bakewell pudding in. So although obviously I had to research it, it was nice to see somebody who'd really gone to town on the research. One of the things that's very clear to me was, yes, there's a secret recipe that's not that hard to work out. Just saying, not like I'm having a go, but it's fairly simple.
Yeah.
And there's lots of very similar. What I'm getting at is there's lots of pretty similar puddings around. It's not like it wasn't just invented out of nothing. It was very much informed, or it's the part of an evolution of a particular type of sweet pudding, isn't it?
Yes, because William Greaves gets interviewed by the Derbyshire Times, who's the son of Anne Greaves and William Greaves, the senior. He is interviewed in the Derbyshire Times in the late 19th century. He describes his mother. She said, "Oh yeah, my mother invented the famous Bakewell pudding, which is then is famous in the 19th century." And he says she got the recipe from a foreign visitor. And
mysterious.
And I think that's really just part of the appeal of selling it, really.
Well, see, this is when I begin to chuck my toys out of the pram. Partly because I've fallen, certainly when I first started doing food history anyway, and even now and again it still happens, temporarily, you fall for a lot of these origin stories because some of them do sound convincing, but now I'm so cynical that I don't believe any.
Yeah, and there are a lot. I mean, and I don't want to sort of upset anybody in Bakewell because there are lots and lots of stories.
Well, everybody sells the original one, don't
indeed,
they? And
everybody sells the original one, which is
Yeah.
fair enough. I think that's good. So it seems likely that she developed the recipe from a traditional English pudding called a sweetmeat pudding, which you can get loads of recipes for.
Yes, it's very delicious.
Through the 18th century.
It's kind of a less expensive version of one because if I'm remembering rightly, there is a very sweet custard that when you cook it, it's slightly transparent. So you can see at the bottom you put all these nice little chopped up bits of candied fruit, haven't you, things like that. So it was very, very, very fancy. So I think maybe they've reduced the amount of sugar, thank goodness, because it's ridiculous, and then used jam instead of expensive.
That's it. And I think that's what Anne Greaves did. Yeah. She replaced all the candied fruit at the bottom with a layer of preserve instead. Although some of the recipes do add the candied fruits as well, and indeed, when it comes to what was her recipe, it's very hard to say. There are lots of people now not lots of people, but there are the various makers of Bakewell pudding who would claim to have an original recipe that somehow came from Anne Greaves.
I mean, they probably passed around. I don't want to sound disparaging to people who make all these claims because what's great is it keeps the mystique and the interest going. So I'm not having a go. However, when you actually try to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, well, I think she probably had different. She had different variations. I'm sure she tried different variations, and as you were sort of hinting at, there are some unusual recipes. There's some, and indeed, the earliest printed one that I've found is in an edition of Vegetable Cookery by Martha Brotherton.
Yeah.
Now, she came from Whittington near Chesterfield as well as Samuel Pegg. So Whittington is a centre of culinary development,
isn't it?
And her version of Bakewell pudding has mashed potato in the custard.
So I've got
which you wouldn't normally include in a custard.
So I've got two things. Well, first of all, actually, mashed potato is very common in some puddings. I've seen lots of Victorian plum pudding recipes where mashed potato is used.
Indeed, yeah.
So again, it's not
strange,
not that
outlandish.
However,
at the time,
plum puddings were eaten with the beef. Bakewell puddings are very sweet and very, very sweet. Definitely a dessert kind of food.
Indeed.
So is it? I put it to you, Mark. Is this a Bakewell pudding with mashed potato in it, or is it just a pudding from Bakewell that has some potato? Do you know what I mean? Is it the Bakewell pudding, or is it just a pudding from Bakewell? What do you reckon? I feel like Jeremy Paxman.
So I wasn't going to answer that directly. I was going to say I think Martha Brotherton has you could say that because she's writing the book about vegetable cookery, she's put mashed potato in it because it's a kind of
I need more potato.
She needs more. I need more vegetables in this.
Good point. Okay.
So it's maybe it's because she's writing specifically a vegetarian cookbook.
Well,
you could argue that. However, there are, and this is sort of tangentially answering your question to a way. There are lots and lots of recipes extant from the early 19th century and indeed later in the 19th century, local recipes as well. In Derbyshire archives, there are a number of 19th century manuscript cookbooks kept by gentry families in the area. Some of which, the Thornhills, for example, knew the Greaves. The Greaves are like successful innkeepers.
Yeah.
The Thornhills was like minor gentry. And they've got some recipes. There's 4 different recipes for Bakewell pudding ascribed to Mrs. Greaves or Mrs. G, and they're all different.
Right.
They've all come from Mrs. Greaves. One of them has got mashed potato in it.
Right.
So it's interesting. I think that she probably had a pudding that she sold as Bakewell pudding and tweaked it, changed it from time to time. There's a wonderful, and I can't. There's the lovely cookbook written by a teenager called Elizabeth Bower. Well, she was a teenager at the time she grew up, and obviously as people do. And she learned to cook at Sheffield Assembly Rooms. So she was from the north of the county near Dronfield, and she recorded a recipe for Bakewell pudding she'd come across in Mat Clock, as she called it, and it's got crushed biscuits in the custard. So there are lots and lots of recipes for this thing floating around, and the appellation Bakewell pudding is applied to them all, and it is something that becomes very, very popular. It's known in America in 1837. There's recipes in the USA.
Yes.
Eliza Acton's got a recipe for it in 1845. She's a bit disparaging of it. She says it's very rich.
There's no pleasing some people, especially Eliza Acton.
And it becomes, it's very popular through the 19th century. The first, again, going back to sort of origins and things and names, the first record, which Ivan Day pointed this out to me, Anne Lister, Gentleman Jack, she records it in her diary. She was from West Yorkshire, Shibden Hall. Mm-hmm. She records in her diary, amongst other colourful things. Yes. There's a food historian. I was more interested in the fact that in 1825 she came to Bakewell and has Bakewell cheesecake. That she says the lady Miss Hudson who served it to her had a special recipe for. Miss Hudson would have been one of the daughters from her first marriage of Anne Greaves. Anne Hudson as was.
As you probably know, shouldn't be taken literally as a...
Exactly.
There's sometimes not even dairy in these cheesecakes. It's more of a textural thing, isn't it?
Which obviously it's got the same texture. Pudding has the same texture. So
that's fascinating.
So that's, I think, the earliest recipe reference to it, 1825. But as I say, I think it's at least much earlier than that. Probably a generation or so earlier than that. It's tremendously popular through the 19th century, but towards the end of the century, it's become too popular. It's too familiar.
Well, it's too familiar, and of course, there are people who want to make cheap versions of things, and there appears the Bakewell tart.
And there we get the development of the Bakewell tart. In the early 20th century, you get the recipes for, now the base has changed. It's become a short crust base instead of the puff pastry base. And the filling is now a layer of jam still, but now the filling is sort of, it's breadcrumbs and a sort of custard mix. It's not it's not just the straight custard.
It starts off as so it very quickly just becomes sponge cake flavoured with some almond. Essence, not even extract.
Yes, I mean, I should have mentioned the almond flavouring sort of is there right from the start.
Yes, it is. That's right. Yes,
in some recipes, not in all.
Right.
Which is interesting. Some recipes, and again, you kind of wonder whether sometimes they put some in or sometimes they wouldn't. They'd see how popular it was. But the Bakewell tarts then get made mass produced.
And Mr. Kipling.
Yeah.
Ices them.
Sold all over and iced as well, and sold all over. I mean, in essence, you could say it is just a development. Like as I say, there were lots and lots of recipes for different Bakewell puddings. Bakewell tart is development in some way of
survival
that.
of the fittest.
Indeed,
fittest does not always mean better.
No.
I remember when I was doing the research for the book, I did find, I think it was a 1920s edition of Mrs. Beeton, and it wasn't a book of household management. It was some of the sort of spin-off, home cookery or something. Anyway, it was done very much like an A to Z.
Yeah.
And I looked up Bakewell pudding, and it said, "See Bakewell tart."
Oh, my word. Oh, gosh.
Shocking. I clutched my pearls.
Well, threw them at some swine.
Yes.
But it does... I'd say the Bakewell tart is very popular. Bakewell pudding carries on. And there's almost like a rearguard action happens in Bakewell to big up the Bakewell pudding, and the stories and the myths sort of get ratcheted up through the 20th century. And the famous one that you hear a lot is that it was an accident. It was created by accident.
Yes.
That first appears in the 20th century, in the 1930s. The origin of it appears to be Vernon Cockton, who was town council in the 1930s, and that really, I suppose, just gives it a bit of a boost. It's like a little marketing exercise.
It's good that you
created by accident.
It seemed you could pretty much pinpoint the origin of the lie. It's one of the things that annoys me, because of course things are created by mistake or through necessity, but it's not because a couple of things accidentally fell in, which the stories always are. It's usually because somebody's very skilled and they thought, do you know what, this might work, and it does. It's not like an accident. It's because somebody very skilled and knew exactly what they were doing, knew their ingredients, knew their clientele, could infer that, if I put these things together, it works. But these things that they knocked over a bottle of this and it fell. It's like it's really doing a disservice to the people. It is doing a disservice.
I think it did a disservice to Anne Greaves, because I think clearly she knew what she was doing. And,
exactly.
And got a pudding that was very popular.
She's like, I know what's going to work. I'll take this, and this,
and sticking the name Bakewell on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a tourist thing.
No accidents.
Come to our town. This is a pub. This is the pudding that I've made, and I'll stick this label on it. In the 1930s, there's this sort of story about it being accidental, and the stories around it being a foreign visitor as well. There's another story about it being an Italian nobleman that seems to gather currency in the 20th century as well. That an Italian nobleman around the time of Garibaldi, exiled for whatever reason, he's over here. He's got this recipe for a pudding, happens to tell somebody in Bakewell, and you think, I don't know. I mean, give the people of the town the credit. That they came up with it and still sell it now.
Occam's razor, right? The most boring answer is usually the right one. So somebody it's just a
you can
brainchild of someone from here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as I say, it's great that it's still being made, that it's still very, very popular. You can buy it several places around the town, and indeed supermarkets around about Derbyshire as well.
Shall we mention Derby cakes?
Yes. So Derby gingerbread is unfortunately not something you can find anymore.
No.
But Derby cakes, I think, is something that, again, is just about clinging on. And Derby cakes are the oldest recipe I can find that mentions somewhere in Derbyshire.
Oh, okay.
Going right back to 1717. And there's a recipe in the Household Handbook of the Geary family, which is a series, again, of household accounts and notes. Mm-hmm. And from the time of Thomas Geary in the early 18th century, he was the mayor of Derby, he's got some written notes about dinners that are to be served, one of which is for the assizes in Derby in April 1717. And alongside that, he's got a recipe for Derby cakes, making a huge mountain of these things. Mm-hmm. They're going to use a bushel of flour, or a strike of flour, as they term it, because that's the term that's used in the north.
I see.
And so, massive amount of fat, 40 pounds of flour. So, they make a lot of cakes. But there, this recipe for making Derby cakes appears in 1717. That's a very old Derbyshire recipe. They get mentioned again in the 19th century. There are printed recipes for Derby cakes. You get them called Derby biscuits. Mm-hmm. The recipe originally made something more like what we'd think of as a cake or a scone, but the recipes in the 19th century start to become more like a biscuit and get called Derby biscuits, and they're popular. I mean, I mentioned at the start about the recipe for savoury pudding being in this collection of recipes from each county by Helen Eden in the 1920s. One of the other recipes she puts in there alongside savoury pudding and Bakewell pudding as well is Derby biscuits.
Right.
She says they are typical of the county. And they were sold by Birds of Derby, who were big bakers who are still going. They were making and selling them into the 2010s, but alas, they don't make them anymore, which is a bit of a shame. However, I mentioned Tyndall's of Tideswell before, and they do still make Derby biscuits. So that's another food that's sort of clinging on.
It's good. It's very encouraging that these foods are being rediscovered or are clinging on.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always going to be some that die out and some that just soldier on. Bakewell puddings, I'm sure, are going to be soldiering on for a good few
I
hundred
think
years
they will.
yet.
I mean, that's great. I mean, it's great that Bakewell puddings are so popular. It's great that Derbyshire Oatcakes are got the big resurgence, and I think the makers of Derbyshire cheeses are also doing very well.
No, it's good.
It's good.
When I finished reading the book, I left feeling encouraged rather than despondent about the regional food of the country and its its longevity.
Yes.
And
there are lots of new things coming around as well. That there are vineyards now in the county. I mean, there are lots of people making gin, and these things seem marvel. It's not necessarily a tradition. You can't necessarily point to a specific tradition around that. But then again, wine has been made in this country for a long time, so it's a kind of revival in some ways.
Tradition's got to start somewhere.
Indeed, and a lot of the botanicals that they're using in making these gins are things that people made into wine, in the 18th century.
Oh, so taking inspiration from historical
I don't know as directly they are, but I feel that somewhere, maybe that's coming into, because they're going out onto the moors, they're going out into the hedgerows, they're finding the same kinds of things.
Oh, I see. Right, yes,
and using them
Yeah.
in a different way.
No, that's very good. We must mention the Leeds Symposium of Food, Drink and Traditions.
We do need to mention
It's
that.
the big 4-0 this year.
It is, yeah, the 40th anniversary, the 40th edition of the symposium, and. Yeah, despite being called the Leeds Food History Symposium, we hold it in York.
Yes, it confused me for many years.
and this year, the topic is food and war, which there should be plenty to interest people on that. And we've got a range of speakers, half a dozen speakers, going from the medieval period through to almost to the present day, to the 1980s.
Right.
So covering quite a wide range, basically not just feeding armies, but also the impact of war on diet as well.
Well, it sounds fascinating, I have to say, so I'm very much looking forward to that. I will be there. My ticket is already purchased.
Good, thank you.
Yes. But brilliant. It's been such a good, fascinating conversation, this, so thank you very much for sparing the time.
Thank you for coming to talk to me, Neil.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark. Now, there are lots of links in the show notes this week to Mark's book, as well as links to his website, which lists his other books, plus upcoming events. I've also added his SpeakerNet profile, plus his Insta handle at Lumpy Tums. There are links to pertinent past episodes of the podcast, like Derbyshire Oatcakes with Mark Dawson, or, if you want to know more about traditional foods in other parts of Britain, there's the traditional food of Lincolnshire with Rachel Green. There's also gingerbread with Sam Bilton and Ormskirk gingerbread with Anushka Lewis. I've also added some past blog posts there for Thar Cake Adjacent, Yorkshire Parkin, and savoury pudding adjacent Dock Pudding, plus sweetmeat pudding is also called sweetmeat cake, which I made for the Jane Grigson blog absolutely yonks ago. I think I was living in America when I made it, in fact. There are also links to many of the books mentioned, loads of links, like I say. Check them out. Okay, rest of news. Well, actually, the only other thing to say is to echo Mark, encouraging you to come to the Leeds Symposium this year. Remember, it's in York. It's not long now. There are still tickets left. I'll be there. Mark will be there. And various friends of the show will be in attendance, I hope anyway. Sam Bilton, I think, will be there. Peter Breers, Ivan Day. And Alessandra Pino and Mark Meltonville are both speaking. So a reminder is on Friday the 24th of April at the Friends Meeting House, Friargate, York. There's a link in the show notes if you want to get a ticket. It's time to go. Please leave positive reviews and rate the podcast on your podcast app so that the podcast can be discovered by more people. And if you can support the podcast and blog financially, I would be most grateful. You can either donate a one-off coffee or pint, or you can start up a monthly £3 subscription to receive access to the secret podcast. And to hear all that extra material, go to britishfoodhistory.com and click on the Support the Blog and Podcast tab, where you can find out about all of the benefits of becoming a subscriber, which includes access to extra blog posts, the secret podcast, like I said, newsletter. Check it out. Don't forget, I want your material for the traditional end-of-season post-bag edition of the podcast. So if you've got any questions, comments or queries from today's episode, send me an email if you like. neil@britishfoodhistory.com. You can also find me on social media. All of my various handles you can find in the show notes. The mixing and sound engineering was done by Thomas Dinas of the Delicious Legacy podcast. Off I go. Have a great week. Until next time, cheerio.